They fined me for my lawn. Seriously, a few blades of grass, and suddenly I was violating community standards. At first, I laughed it off until the fines started stacking up. 50 here, 100 there, all for having a yard cleaner than most on the block. That's when I decided to look closer. And what I discovered about our HOA president, her own little secret, hiding in plain sight, turned every smug warning into pure silence. That's when the real tables turned. When I first moved into Oak Ridge Estates, it felt like the kind of neighborhood you only saw in real estate brochures. Perfectly trimmed hedges, pastel mailboxes, and families waving from driveways as if they'd all been cast for the same commercial. The lawns looked identical, the fences lined up like soldiers, and every house had that same soft beige glow under the morning sun. I'll admit, I liked it. After years of renting cramped apartments, buying my first home here felt like peace. My wife, Sarah, planted flowers near the porch. Our son, Max, chased his soccer ball across the yard. For the first time, life felt predictable in the best way. That's when I learned predictability can be dangerous, especially in a place where perfection isn't just admired, it's enforced. The HOA wasn't some friendly group that handled maintenance and holiday decorations. It was more like a quiet surveillance network with clipboards and bylaws. Every month, a new reminder landed in our mailbox. Rules about fence paint, garbage timing, mailbox polish, even the acceptable range of grass height. I thought it was ridiculous, but most neighbors nodded along like it was normal. And at the center of it all was her, Margaret, the HOA president. Mid-50s, sharp haircut, the kind of smile that made you feel judged before you even said hello. She ran the community like a private kingdom with her little team of loyal board members, all eager to please her. Rumor had it she'd been re-elected 6 times, and no one had ever dared to run against her. At first, I kept my head down. I paid my dues, mowed my lawn, waved when she passed by in her golf cart patrols. I thought if I followed the rules, I'd be fine. But Margaret had a talent for finding problems where none existed. It started with friendly notices. One for leaving my trash bins out too long, even though the pickup truck had been delayed that morning. Another for having a small garden hose visible from the street. Then came the one that would start it all. Violation. Lawn not in compliance with community appearance standards. I remember staring at that line, genuinely confused. My lawn was healthy, green, freshly trimmed. In fact, I had just mowed it that morning. The notice didn't explain what was non-compliant. It didn't have photos or measurements, just a warning, signed by Margaret herself. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was a clerical mistake. But a week later, another letter came, this time with a $50 fine attached, then $100, then $150. Each one colder, more formal, and more absurd than the last. When I asked around, a few neighbors just shook their heads. One whispered, "You don't want to get on Margaret's bad side." Another admitted he'd paid a $75 fine for overwatering. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about lawns. It was about control. Something about me, maybe standing up or asking questions, must have made her a new project. And if Margaret wanted a battle, she was about to get one. Because unlike everyone else, I wasn't afraid to push back, and I had a few tricks of my own.
The first fine was almost funny. The second was frustrating. By the third, it wasn't funny anymore. Each envelope from the HOA came printed on crisp white paper with the same header: Notice of Violation, Failure to Maintain Community Standards. Each one arrived exactly 7 days apart, like clockwork, with a new fee tacked on. The reasons were vague: lawn discoloration, uneven cut, overgrowth detected. Overgrowth? My grass was barely 3 inches tall. I used the same mower setting I'd always used. Sarah told me to ignore it, to not let them get under my skin. But that's exactly what Margaret wanted. It wasn't about the lawn, it was about control. When I called the HOA office, her assistant, a timid man named Carl, mumbled that the board had received multiple complaints. When I asked from whom, he said that information was confidential. Convenient. I asked for an inspection in person. Margaret refused, saying the photos on file were sufficient proof. I requested to see them. She said they were internal records. Every question hit a wall. And that's when I realized the HOA wasn't built to serve homeowners, it was built to protect itself. The following week, I started documenting everything. Every time I mowed, every letter, every notice, photos with timestamps, dates of calls. If they wanted to play games, I'd play smarter. But it didn't stop there. They escalated. One morning, I woke up to find a bright orange stake in my yard. Inspection notice pending. The neighbors stared as they drove by. Later, I overheard two of them whispering, "That's the guy who got fined again." Humiliation. That's what it was really about. Make one person the example, and everyone else falls in line. The next HOA newsletter even had a section titled Maintaining Community Pride. It didn't name me, but it didn't have to. There was a paragraph about certain properties failing to uphold expected standards, complete with a photo that looked suspiciously like my street corner. I'd had enough, so I started digging. HOA bylaws are public, or at least partially. Late nights, I sat in my office flipping through PDFs and scanned pages buried on their website, page after page of jargon, until one small detail jumped out. All properties are subject to biannual lawn evaluations by a certified inspector. Certified inspector. Interesting. Margaret's inspection reports had no signatures, no third-party documentation, nothing that proved they'd ever been done by anyone but her or her loyal board members. I began walking around the neighborhood in the evenings, just observing. Most lawns looked fine, some even worse than mine. Overgrown edges, patchy spots, weeds in the cracks, and yet no orange stakes, no warnings, no fines. One lawn in particular caught my eye, Margaret's. Her front yard had brown spots near the edges, dead patches under the hedge, and, unbelievably, a broken sprinkler head leaking water down her driveway. I took photos, dated them, saved them all. The hypocrisy burned. The following week, I overheard Carl, her assistant, talking outside the community center. He mentioned that the HOA's inspection forms weren't being verified anymore because Margaret said it wasn't necessary this quarter. My suspicion turned into certainty. She was fabricating violations. The next week, I received the one more letter. This time, an ultimatum. Failure to pay fines within 14 days will result in a lien being placed on your property. That was it, the line I wouldn't let them cross. I printed every photo, every timestamp, every message. Then I made one more visit to the county records office. It turns out Margaret's property had already been cited by the city once before for improper irrigation drainage, something she'd conveniently left out of her HOA reports. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was prepared. So, when the next HOA meeting rolled around, I made sure to show up early. The parking lot was packed. Neighbors, board members, even the landscaper. Everyone signed in, collected their agenda, and took their seats. Margaret stood at the front like a queen before her subjects, clipboard in hand, smiling that same tight smile she'd always worn before issuing bad news. I sat quietly, waiting for my turn to speak. She had no idea what was coming.
The room buzzed with low murmurs as the meeting began. Folding chairs lined the walls. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, and the faint hum of the air conditioner couldn't drown out the tension that hung thick in the air. Margaret stood at the front, her voice crisp and self-assured. "Good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin tonight's meeting by addressing ongoing concerns regarding lawn maintenance compliance. Our goal, as always, is to preserve the beauty and value of Oak Ridge Estates." Her words dripped with polished authority, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Heads suddenly turned in my direction. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. Margaret continued, flipping through her clipboard. "Unfortunately, we've had repeated non-compliance issues at several properties." I raised my hand. "Before you continue, I have a few questions." Her smile faltered just a little. "You'll have your turn during open floor comments." "With respect," I said, standing up, "this concerns me directly, and since my name's been mentioned in every notice you've sent for the past month, I think we can skip the formality." The crowd shifted. A few neighbors whispered. Some smirked knowingly. Margaret hesitated, but gestured stiffly. "Fine, you have 2 minutes." "Perfect," I said, "because that's all I'll need." I pulled out a thick folder and laid it on the table. The sound of paper hitting wood echoed through the room. "These," I said, "are every notice, photo, and inspection report you've sent me, and I've compared them against the HOA bylaws." I flipped open a page, highlighting a section with yellow marker. Section 7.4. Lawn evaluations must be conducted by a certified third-party inspector. Can you tell us who conducted mine? Margaret blinked. "The board handles that internally." "So, not certified?" I asked, my tone sharp. "We've always done it this way." "Then you've always been breaking your own rules." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see Carl, her assistant, shrinking in his chair. Margaret's face flushed. "Mr. Anderson, this isn't a courtroom." "No," I said, stepping forward, "but it might become one." I held up another sheet. "Because according to county records, your own property was cited by the city last year for irrigation runoff. That's a real violation. Yet you're fining others for grass height?" Her lips tightened. "That's irrelevant." "Oh, it's very relevant," I shot back. "You fined me over $600 for a lawn that meets all city codes. You've harassed my family, embarrassed us publicly, and used your position to settle personal grudges. You violated your own bylaws, and I've got the evidence to prove it." The room went silent. For the first time, Margaret looked uncertain. She shuffled the papers in her hand, glancing toward the other board members, but they avoided her eyes. One of them, an older man named Dennis, cleared his throat. "Is this true, Margaret? Were the inspections handled without certification?" She hesitated. It's standard practice." "That's not an answer," Dennis pressed. The crowd began whispering louder now. Someone muttered, "I knew it." Another said, "She fined me for flower pots last year." Margaret tried to regain control. "Let's all remain civil. These accusations are baseless and—" I cut her off. "Baseless. I have photographic proof." I turned my laptop around, connected to the projector they'd used earlier. The screen flickered the life, and one by one I showed time-stamped photos, my lawn perfectly trimmed, her yard, brown patches and all, and the screenshot of the city citation tied to her property. Gasps filled the room. She took a step back. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "You made it personal first. You weaponized your position against your neighbors, and now the truth's out." Sarah squeezed my arm. I could feel her shaking, whether from nerves or pride, I wasn't sure. The HOA president, an elderly woman who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke. "Margaret, until this matter is reviewed, I'm suspending your authority over code enforcement." The room erupted. Some clapped, others whispered in disbelief. Margaret looked like she'd been slapped. "This isn't over," she hissed, grabbing her bag. "No," I said softly, "it's just beginning." She stormed out, the door slamming behind her. For the first time in months, I felt the tension leave my shoulders. Neighbors approached me afterwards, people I'd barely spoken to before. "Good for you," one said. "She's been bullying everyone for years," another whispered. "About time someone stood up." And just like that, the power shifted. The meeting ended not with Margaret's voice echoing through the room, but with quiet conversations among people finally realizing how much control they'd given away. When we walked back home under the glow of the streetlights, Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. "You really did it," she said. I nodded, though I knew it wasn't completely over. HOAs have a way of clinging to power, but something had cracked. Her authority, her image, maybe even the fear she built the whole system on. For the first time, Oak Ridge Estates felt just a little freer.
The morning after the meeting felt unreal. For the first time in months, there were no envelopes on my door, no threats in the mailbox, just sunlight, sprinklers, and silence. Neighbors who once avoided me now waved. Even the ones who used to whisper looked relieved, like a weight had finally lifted. Margaret's grip on Oak Ridge Estates had finally cracked. Within a week, word spread fast. Dozens of residents shared their own stories. Fines for trash cans, flower pots, even holiday lights. The absurdity of it all became too obvious to ignore. At the next HOA meeting, without Margaret, the tone was completely different. Dennis, one of the older board members, stood up and said, "The rules were meant to protect this neighborhood, not control it. We lost sight of that." Applause broke out. The board voted to rewrite the bylaws. No fines without third-party verification. No anonymous complaints. Every major rule now required a resident vote. For the first time, the HOA felt like a community again. Margaret quietly resigned soon after. Rumor was she'd been caught mishandling HOA funds. Poetic, really. By summer, Oak Ridge Estates looked alive again. Lawns weren't identical anymore. Kids played outside. People talked over fences instead of complaining through letters. I put a small sign on my lawn that read, "Freedom grows here." Neighbors smiled when they saw it. Some even made their own. The tension was gone. The fear was gone. And for the first time, our neighborhood felt like it actually belonged to the people who lived in it, not the ones who ruled it. A few weeks later, a clip from the meeting went viral online. Thousands watched Margaret's downfall, and strangers shared their own HOA nightmares. It wasn't just about lawns anymore. It was about standing up when something small becomes something wrong. The story ended the way it should, with peace, not paperwork. And sometimes, when I water the grass at sunset, I think back to that first violation notice, the one that started it all, and I smile. Because in the end, I didn't just win against an HOA, I reminded an entire neighborhood that they could say no. They tried to control every blade of grass, but in the end, all it took was one homeowner to remind them who really owned the ground beneath it.
If you enjoyed seeing justice served, make sure you hit subscribe, because the next HOA nightmare might just be wilder than this one. Don't miss it.